here's a montage that he put together for me. And we're going to hear this, just to give you a sample of what he does. And when this is over, we're going to bring Alan on. Here's his sound effects montage. All right, that was the soundtrack work of Alan Howarth, and without further ado, let's say hi to the man. Alan, how are you tonight?
Hey, Robert, thanks for having me on tonight.
It's my pleasure. That was a pretty impressive array of music there. Can you maybe backfill a little bit of that for us and highlight some of the places that music has shown up?
Sure, that was a sequence of Halloween 4, Blue Planet Theater, which I did for the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, some cuts from a movie called They Live, that Rowdy Piper movie.
That's right.
Another one called Arcade, which is sort of another kind of a Tron movie. And the last batch was from a show called Big Trouble in Little China, which was a great Kurt Russell, Kim Cattrall movie.
That's an awesome film. That's like, I've got like my 10 sort of like, guilty favorites, and Big Trouble in Little China is like got to be in the top 5 in that one. I love that film.
Well, at the time we made it, everybody put their heart and soul into it, and then there was a marketing ploy at Fox, which just kept it from rising to its real place, but it has legs in an afterlife, and people still know it exists and enjoy it.
Yep, and it's one of those films that shows up on cable from time to time, and if you haven't seen it, it's a really magical ride, and Kurt Russell is great as, his name is Jack, right?
Yep.
And he plays, he's a trucker, and he's kind of a reluctant hero, and it's sort of this mystical, supernatural, kind of campy swashbuckling film, isn't it?
Absolutely, and that's a John Carpenter film. I did at least 9 movies with John Carpenter throughout the 80s. A lot of horror shows. The Halloweens I did, Halloween 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But then also did a lot of sound effects work. I did 6 Star Trek movies, the original motion pictures with Kirk and Spock, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Poltergeist, Back to the Future 2 and 3. So I've danced between being a composer and also being a sound effects designer specialist.
So let's go back into your own personal history, and this isn't even something. I mean, you and I have spent a fair amount of time together and talked together and hung out, but I really don't know how you got into this field. We never really covered that. What turned you on about sound effects, and when did you say, hey, this is what I want to do when I grow up?
Well, it was never anything I wanted to do when I grew up. When I was a little kid, I was going to be an artist, a painter type character. And so I spent most of grade school and high school being the president of the art class, always being one of the teacher's favorites, showing a lot of talent in art. And then as a background, my dad had an accordion, so I learned how to play the accordion, and then I went on to do the alto sax, and music was sort of a background. Well, then in about 1965, I got invited to sit into a band one night just to play like Glenn Miller music on the saxophone. And I remember at the end of that night, they handed me $80, and that was it. I sold out on art, and I went for music. So for $80, it changed my fate. Then I did the whole rock and roll thing. I made records. Our band was very popular in the northeastern Ohio area. We opened for the Cream and the Who and Steppenwolf, and we rubbed shoulders with the big boys. But in the band business, if you don't get a hit, eventually that band will break up, go on to the next thing. And I wound up going on to actually being a roadie or a road technician for a jazz band called Weather Report, a very famous jazz fusion band. And that jazz fusion band traveled all over the world. That's about 76 to 80. And then on the oddest of circumstances, this big burly biker buddy of mine named Pax Lemon, who was from Cleveland, was now working at Paramount. And there was just one day when a couple folks had a conversation about they wanted somebody who knew about synthesizers. And Pax turns around and he goes, "Oh, you got to talk to my buddy Alan. He knows all about that stuff. He works for Weather Report." And the two guys, a fellow named Steve Flick and Richard Anderson, look at him and go, "Weather Report, is that the one at 7 o'clock or 11? Thinking that was like, the weather broadcast. But nonetheless, he gave them my number, and I went down and met them, and they said, "Well, can you do an audition tape and make a sound effect for us?" And I said, "Okay, what are we doing?" And they say, "We're doing Star Trek, the motion picture. Can you make us the sound of the Starship Enterprise going warp 1 to warp 7? Well, we went back to my little dining room studio with a TAC 4-track and a little Prophet synthesizer, and I dialed up what I thought was the sound of the Enterprise, turned in the audition tape, and that was it. I hit a home run right out of the gate. That sound became the sound of the Enterprise, and I went on to do 6 Star Trek movies. So you never know where this is going to come from. You just follow your path, kind of follow your instincts, follow your passions. And for me, I've been very blessed in this lifetime. I wound up in the right place at the right time several times now.
Well, I mean, that's usually a pretty good sign, and I totally agree with you. I mean, none of us really have a map, and I think that, if we can get down to the corner store, and that's usually about the length of our instincts, we can just keep going, metaphorically speaking. But I think you're absolutely right. Your experience with Weather Report. I mean, I'm a big jazz fusion guy, and you and I did talk a little bit about Weather Report. Give people some insight that aren't familiar with the band about kind of who they were and how important they were, especially coming out of the world of Miles Davis and the impact that he made on the music world.
Sure. Well, the principals of Weather Report, the founding 2 members, was Wayne Shorter, who played with Herbie Hancock, Miles Davis, and those guys in the original Miles band. And then the keyboard player was a fellow named Joe Zawinul, who played with Cannonball Adderley and was actually an Austrian fella. And he came out of wartime Germany, having been totally trained to be a classical musician, but wanted to be a jazz guy. So he moved to New York and got into the scene. So Wayne and Joe put together this band, Weather Report, and they had an assortment of bass players and drummers throughout the length of the band. Several famous ones. Eric Gravatt. They had Undugo on the drums, Alex Acuna, Manolo Badrenia, and eventually the sort of the version that I was around had Peter Erskine on drums, and then they had several bass players, of which one was a fellow named Al Johnson, and then from Al Johnson it went to this unbelievable character named Jaco Pastorius, and he was really the Jimi Hendrix of the fretless bass guitar. He stepped up to the plate, and I was a bass player myself for a while, so I really knew what he was up to, but I remember seeing the first time he played, I just went, holy mackerel, I never even thought of that. This guy was so advanced and so lyrical, and he really made the bass guitar step out of the back line as a rhythm instrument into a lead instrument. So he was really the one person that stood up with Wayne and Joe and really made that power front line of fretless bass, saxophone, and a whole flotilla of keyboards. And that was my job, was to take care of all those analog synths. So I remember having 2 ARP 2600s and a Prophet 5 and a Rhodes and a Oberheim and a Help Still grand piano pickup and all kinds of processors. And the thing was a beast to travel around the world with all this fluctuations in power and current. So I was like the butler. I would set all that stuff every day, get it all tuned up, do the sound check, and then turn around on Joe's Alan and I'll say, okay, Joe, you can play now.
And yeah, absolutely. I mean, so you're touring, you're going to all these different countries, and then you've got the different outputs, different voltages and all that stuff. And,
yep.
And it had to be an incredibly complex and detail-oriented gig. And did you ever get it wrong one night and blow up the synthesizer?
Well, actually, there was one night we played at the Beacon Theater in New York, and it was one of the early Prophet 5s. We had one of the, I think it's serial number 6 or something like that. And these were studio instruments that we were taking on the road. And I remember sitting down, setting it all up, and then we opened the thing out of the case, and all the programs were gone. And this was before backup or anything. So we literally held the door for 45 minutes for me and Joe Zawinul to reprogram the synthesizers to do the set. We got all the programming done, and all this pressure's on you, like, oh man, you got to get this right, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Got it fired up, said, okay, open the doors. Joe gets up to play the first tune, pushes the button, and the whole thing wipes its memory again.
Oh no.
Oh man, and the band's already playing. So Zawinul was really furious, but being the showman that he was, he just played every one of those synth parts on the piano that night and played the heck out of it.
I bet.
And then the funny part of the story is at the end of the night, I finally got to figure out what was going on. I opened the thing up, and a little nut had come off the back of one of the circuit boards. It was laying up on the back where the little circuit pieces are, and was shorting out, just randomly shorting out a little something across one of the backs where the memory was. So I fixed it, but boy, it was unbelievable. You get into these situations where you are the only person that's going to solve the problem, and you got thousands of people waiting for you. It's hairy.
Isn't it fascinating that just a little thing like a loose nut could completely wipe out an entire program?
That stuff was fragile. I mean, we're getting so spoiled now with this technology.
Yeah.
I've lived it from, golly, the 60s to what we've got today. And it's like my daughter just got herself the state-of-the-art PC laptop. This thing's got a 128 gig solid-state drive. It weighs nothing. It boots up instantly. It's never going to break unless you actually run a car over it. But
wow.
That's today. And this is an industry that just if you want to track electronics, where we've come from and where we are now, and it's just going to keep going.
Yeah.
Moore's Law, it doubles every 18 months. And now there's another one where probably by 2015, the total amount of information will double daily.
Daily.
On the internet? Yeah. It's just going to go astronomical.
Wow. That is really incredible.
Shows and blogging and websites and more stuff on eBay and all the major networks jumping in now. And I was just took a meeting with a group up in San Francisco that's going to do an internet television station. So they're going to have these massive servers, much like a Netflix kind of game.
Right.
Everything will just be on demand. No nothing. You just click on it, it'll be there.
Well, I think I read something along the lines of 10 inventions that will die, or 10 things that will die in the next 20 years. And one of them was, of course, postage. The other was your TV.